welcome back to another video on DBD Lore. Doing something a bit different this time. I have a microphone, as you can see. I actually got it a little while ago, but I had a lot of trouble connecting it. So I thought I'd give it a go today to see if it makes my voice a bit clearer. So the first killer I wanted to mention today is the Death Slinger. I've had to get a lot of it up on the phone because it's quite a complicated story, but if I lose line aside, that's why. Okay, so he was originally called Caleb Quinn, and he lived in Badlands in the Midwest of America. And he was an Irish immigrant, and he lived with his dad. And his dad was an inventor, but because so little Irish immigrants were actually being hired, he hadn't invented anything for a long time, so it's like his tools got dusty and forgotten. And then one day, he noticed that his son was taking quite an interest in, building and inventing. So he gave his son his old wrench as a gift. And he would oversee him creating things. And they were innocent enough at first, things just to help around the house and, things like that. And then when his father wasn't looking, he would create things that were a lot more sinister. Like a face mask that was designed to hurt people, things like that. Eventually he was hired on the American Midwest Rail, and he started to design new things. And because he was designing all these new things, his employer, sorry, just 1 second, Henry Beecher, he noticed. And after a while, Caleb noticed that a lot of his inventions were going missing, and they would turn up at other places, and no one could understand why. So eventually, Caleb just lost it. He unalived his employer, or he tried to unalive him. And the only thing that saved him from the death sentence was the fact that his employer survived, and it was very unlikely. So Caleb was sent to a penitentiary to stay. He managed to make very good friends with the prison warden, who would allow him to carry on his inventions. And he was very impressed by them. So he said he would see about getting Caleb out if he would make him rich. So he allowed him to go into the workshop and invent all manners of things, and that's how the railgun that the Death Slinger uses was invented. So the warden let out a lot of Irish immigrants that had been arrested, and they kind of made up a posse for Caleb. And he tested it on a robbery. Someone tried to rob a takeaway shop, so Caleb tested out the railgun, and it was very successful. And the gang that Keelan created with the other inmates ended up being called the Hellshire Gang, and everyone was a bit nervous about it. He actually unalived the warden as well, because at this point the bloodlust had overtaken him. He was in such a frenzy from, being successful with what he was doing that he did that without thinking. Then he just went back to his old cell and he found a way out in there and he followed it, and it ended up being hallucinations, but in his hallucinations he defeated his school bullies, other people that wronged him, and that's when the fog overtook him. So sorry, I had to look down a lot to make sure, but I don't want to get it wrong for you. But yeah, the Deathslinger in the game, I think he would be seen as a very hard killer. He has quite a learning curve, to be able to shoot and aim, but also to take the time to reload as well. It could be quite difficult, but he is good. He's very hard to play against and very hard to play as. But once you learn the ropes of how to play him, he's actually very good. And it's a very interesting lore. Now, there's a few killers that we've already gone through. The Wraith, Hillbilly, the Nurse. Well, the Nurse came a bit later. They were seen as the original killers, and then these were added with DLCs and chapters which were purchasable, and you can purchase the killers separately without actually purchasing the chapters now. And it's just very interesting to see all the different people that were created from that. The next killer I wanted to speak about is the Blight. And once again, I might break eye contact on my phone for a few details. But I thought this story was quite interesting because not all of it, but the beginning is quite similar to the story of the Doctor. So before he was the Blight, he was known as Talbot Grimes. He was quite a popular child, he was well liked, but he was also very independent, and he was very determined to do what he wanted. And it would show itself because he would look into medicine, chemistry, things like that. One day he went for a walk on a hilltop and he found, a foxglove. And at that point he didn't quite know what it was, and he spent days experimenting on it because foxglove is so poisonous. He spent days in bed afterwards. He was so ill. And when he came out of his fever, he wasn't upset, he was fascinated about how something so small could give him such a reaction. So after that, he attended school in the UK, which specialised in medicine and in chemistry, and because he did so well, he became the owner of a laboratory. And some of his experiments became a little bit more questionable. He was trying to develop a lot of different things, and he eventually developed a drug that could be given to workers, and it would make them work a lot harder. So that worked out, and he became quite famous. And he went to India, and while he was in India, he started experimenting on prisoners of the Opium War, and he created a drug that would help the soldiers withstand a lot of pain and strengthen them. There were side effects, but they were mainly minor ones. But people didn't question it that much because in their mind the war was being won, so it was a good thing. But the small side effects, people were basically going feral. They were massacring villages and everything. And then one day, Talbot was caught up to, because with this first drug, it went wrong, and a company used it, and they basically lost an entire workload because they all passed. So they kidnapped Talbot. He didn't know at the time he was hit over the head with the pipe, and then he was blindfolded while he was unconscious. So when he came round and realised who it was, they brought a lot of people, and he knew he would never get away from them. So they did horrible things and left him, supposedly because they thought there was no way he would survive. And then he was taken in by what was supposedly a monastery, but it was actually like another laboratory that specialised in different dimensions. And while he was there, he created another drug. He created this other drug that could open up the mind's eye, and it was unthinkable, and no one thought that would cause any side effects. But it seemed that as time went on, the monks that he was working with looked at him differently, and like they were hiding something. And then one day, he had no idea what had happened, but the roof to the monastery opened. It cracked right down the middle, and that was the last thing he would see. And then people found the monastery and looked, and all they could find was destruction and bloodshed, and no one knew what happened to everyone there. So the reason I like this story, because it shows the madness that can come from trying to be better than everyone else, believing because he was such an independent person, it kind of, there's nothing wrong with being independent and trying to better yourself, but it's that point where an ego becomes bigger than yourself and bigger than what anyone else can imagine. And when you are that good, you can create things that cause a lot of problems, and that's what happened with the Blight. He became so strong that everyone else suffered. And In the game, in the universe of Dead by Daylight, he is a very powerful killer. He has a very powerful attack where he can ricochet off different objects so that he can down people very quickly. And he has a cooldown period and he can do it a certain number of times. But he is very powerful, so again, he's the kind of killer where there is a learning curve. And you have to really work in a certain way to get away from him as a survivor as well. So he is, I would say, a very hard killer. Okay, so the next one is very sad. I think so anyway. And it's the twins. And have a very sad backstory. It was originally that the twins were called Victor and Charlotte Deshays. And they, sorry, that's the cat you can hear. Victor and Charlotte were conjoined twins, and they were born in France. And it was the 17th century, so it was very unlikely that they would be a successful birth, but they were. The only thing was Victor was conjoined around Charlotte's chest area, and the nurse the midwife that helped bring them into the world ran off screaming that they were demons born by a witch. And that's how it began. Everybody would look at Charlotte, Victor, and the mother, Madeline, as, witches. And they would be chased. So they lived rough, basically, on the run all the time. And then one day, their mother, Madeline, fell ill, and she couldn't do much of anything while she was as ill as she was. So it fell to Charlotte, and obviously Victor as well, because he was part of Charlotte. They would have to steal food so that it could survive and look after their mum too. And it worked for a little while. And then one day they went to sleep and they woke up and they'd been kidnapped. And they took Madeline and burned her as a witch. And Charlotte and Victor were forced to watch the entire thing. And then from there, Charlotte and Victor were taken to a temple. And they were experimented on. There were things like they had to cut themselves and bleed into vases, and they had to sleep with branches under the pillows, and all manner of things that just didn't make sense. And then one day there was a final experiment, and for the experiment they were forcibly taken to an altar and laid down, and a man approached with the hood, and he had a knife, and Charlotte was fiercely overprotective of Victor, so she rolled off the table and swung. It was either her or Victor swung at a candelabra and set the temple on fire. And the fire quickly got out of control, and they managed to run through the blaze and escape. And Charlotte ran as far as she could until they got to some woods, and she noticed her brother had passed away during the struggle. So he was still a part of her, but he wasn't there anymore. So she basically had no choice but to keep running, but she was mourning the loss at the same time. And that's how life went through a good while. She would run to make sure she wouldn't get captured again, but she could never get away from what she'd lost, which I think is like the saddest part. And then one night she lay down to sleep and she closed her eyes and then she heard a noise. She woke up and somehow Victor was outside her body and he was alive. And he got up and he ran into the woods like he was scared, shouting and everything. So Charlotte, as quick as she could, she got up and gave chase as well. So that was the last time anybody saw Charlotte running into the woods and protecting her brother, making sure that no one could hurt him. So it's a very sad story. I like the way that they've kind of, there's obviously no reasoning behind becoming, someone who does what they do. But I like the way they kind of built up a story to why it started to happen. Which is very sad but very interesting. So in the universe of Dead by Daylight, they say she's a medium moderate killer. Because the thing is, you control Charlotte as the killer, but you can also control Victor. But if you control Victor, you can't control Charlotte. So what happens is they'll have Victor chase a survivor, and then he latches onto them. And then you switch back to controlling Charlotte, and you get like a pulsating web in the area where they are, and you have a certain amount of time to get back to them before the survivor can break free and they can down Victor. So I think they are hard to play against because it's like you're not just looking for one person and you've got to listen out for the sounds that Victor makes. I haven't actually played as them, but I have heard that can be quite difficult as well. There's kind of a learning curve to it. So, yeah, I think that's an interesting one. The final one I wanted to speak about on this video is the artist. And I wanted to do it because I believe, I'm sure there's lots of different opinions out there, but the artist's story is one of the saddest, most tragic ones. So, she was called Carmina Mora, and she always loved art. Her mother passed when she was young, so she lived with her father and her little brother Matthias. And her father got drunk to deal with his grief a lot, and he wasn't around, so Carmina basically looked after her brother. And that's how it went for a long time. She felt like her father blamed her for what happened to her mother, and it upset her, but Matthias kept her going and gave her a reason to carry on. And she did her artwork at the same time, and that gave her a reason to. And one day she was painting while her brother was playing, and her father, as he normally was well on his way to getting drunk, but Carmina didn't notice as much. So she allowed her little brother to play while she did a painting. And then she noticed that Matthias, I keep saying it wrong, was silent. So she went down, she looked everywhere and she couldn't find him. So she went down to the river, and that's where she found his coat. He'd fell in the river, and the worst had happened. So that was something else that her father blamed her for. He'd barely speak to her, and if he did speak to her, he'd be cruel. And she'd lost everything, basically. She will paint, but to a point, she'd lost her inspiration, so even that became less and less, and she felt not good for anything. So she went to a highway bridge. I'm just getting the thing up to make sure I haven't missed anything. She went to a bridge, and it was actually on his birthday. And she was convinced that was it, that there was no reason to celebrate, but on that day she was sure she would join him. So she wanted to jump off the bridge, and she prepared herself, and she got to the edge of the bridge and let go, and she could feel herself falling through the air, but all of a sudden she felt like she'd stopped, and she wound up opening her eyes, and there were swarms of crows all around her, and they were holding her up, and they flew her back to the bridge so that she wouldn't jump off after all. So it kind of gave her a bit of a second chance, and she felt like she needed to carry on because something had stopped her from stopping herself. So she went back home, and she started painting again because she felt like inspired by what had happened and by having the second chance at life. And the pictures, although they were black, were beautiful. And she started with poetry as well. And she performed on streets, in galleries, things like that. And her work gained a lot of recognition. And someone tried to take her onto their label, but they were very dodgy. They did a lot of very bad things. And instead of trying to join them, Carmina tried to bring them down. And it went quiet for a while. And then masked gunmen broke into a house and subdued her. And then she had friends with her, and they were taken too, and she was kidnapped in the back of a van. And then she woke up. And she woke up, and sorry about that, I just had to go and answer the front door. So she woke up, and they were in what seemed to be a desert. And there was a man in front of her, and he had a long robe on, so she couldn't see who it was, but she knew it had something to do with this label. And the man had a knife, and this is where it gets a bit gory and disturbing. But he said he didn't. How are you going to paint now? And he took hands. And then he said, how are you going to say poetry now, and he took a tongue and he unalived all of her friends, and the crows came down and trying to save her life. They attacked the man and unalived the man, and they started on her friends, which obviously drove her into a state of madness because of what she was seeing. And she fainted, and as darkness overtook her, that's when she saw the fog. And that's where her journey into DBD began. And I wanted to talk about that one last because it is so incredibly sad to have that much loss and then to find that one thing that kind of helped her with the grief and then to have it taken away, so it's impossible as well. It's not understandable that she hurt people, but it's understandable that she went mad. And in the world of DBD, she's a very scary killer. She has scary music, and obviously without a tongue, she gasps, and it's like, horror. And she doesn't have hands. She kind of has claws, but they almost look like twigs. And her map is Eyrie of Crows, which is a desert kind of map with a building in the middle with a lot of canvases, but books as well. So I think, that's a good story to end this one with because it's so sad, but it's got this amazing story to it.